Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my June wrap up. So in June I had my best reading month of the year so far, and I had my second best reading month ever. If you watched last week's vlog, you will know that I tried my hardest to beat my best reading month ever, but I missed out by 200 pages. I went over on the books. I read more books than I read in my best month ever, but I didn't quite make the pages. I was short of 200 pages and I'm bitter about it. I'm really damn bitter. So in the month of June, I managed to read an enormous 13 books, and I have Ghibliathon to thank for a lot of this. I completely aced that readathon. I read 6 books in 1 week. The rest of the month was great as well, but I really kicked ass in Ghibliathon and bumped up that monthly book count. So thankfully I had the foresight to do a mid-month wrap-up, so if you would like to see reviews for any of these 5 books and also Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, I will put a link up here to my mid-month wrap-up where I go into these ones in depth. These were the first 5 books that I read in June. We have Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman, There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins, Living Dead in Dallas by Charlene Harris, Orange, The Complete Collection Volume 1 by Ichigo Takano, and Children of the Whales Volume 2 by Abby Umeda. But if you're sticking around here, we will be going through my reading stats for the entire month of June, and then we will be moving on to reviews of the 7 books that I read in the second half of the month. So going into my stats, I read a total of 13 books, which added up to 4,456 pages in total, which breaks down to an average of 148.5 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 3 stars, 1 3.5 star, 4 4 stars, and 5 5 stars, which is an average of 4.1 per book. This average rating is the same as last month's average rating, but I would also like to point out that not only did I have a great month in June quantity wise, I also didn't give a rating below 3 stars, so the worst books I read were only mediocre. For the demographics, I read 5 adult books, 7 young adult books, and 1 children's book. The interesting thing about this is that I think it is the first month this year where I have read more young adult than adult books in a month. And for the format, we had 7 physical books, 2 manga, 1 graphic novel, 1 anthology, 1 audiobook, and 1 ebook. So we have a much wider range than we normally do. I normally only have 2 or 3 formats. I generally read the majority of physical novels. Now for the big one, the genres that I read. I read 4 fantasy, 2 contemporary, 2 science fiction, 1 thriller, 1 horror, 1 dystopian, 1 paranormal, and 1 collection of short stories that was a mix of genres. And then lastly, the places that I sourced these books from. 8 of them are books that I've hauled in 2019. This is definitely the biggest percentage of books in a month that I've read that I've hauled this year. Generally, the biggest percentage comes from my owned TBR, but this month I only read 4 from my TBR that existed before 2019, and I read 1 book on Scribd. So those are my stats for June. Now moving on to the first of the reviews. The first book that I finished in the second half of the month was Summer Days and Summer Nights. This is a young adult anthology that was edited by Stephanie Perkins, and it contains a variety of summer romances that are from all different genres and written by a whole host of very popular young adult authors. Now, I don't have too much to say about this because how I rate anthologies is that I give each individual story a rating and then I work out an average. So this is the book that I rated 3.5 this month. It got exactly 3.5 based on my individual ratings of each story. But as with most anthologies, I enjoyed some of these. I didn't enjoy others. My least favourite ones was the one by Cassandra Clare because I felt like the whole ending just wrapped up really quickly. Up until that point it was good, apart from I noticed that Cassandra Clare really likes incest plot lines because the romance in question is between the main character and I think it's her step cousin. So almost incest is Cassandra Clare's thing apparently. And then my favourite short story in this, which is the only one that I gave 5 stars, was The Map of Tiny Perfect Things by Lev Grossman. That one was a science fiction with a Groundhog Day kind of plot where we have our main character who is stuck in the same day over and over again, and he is the only person who knows that the day is repeating until he meets a girl who is the only other person who knows that the day is repeating, and when they've relived this day quite a few times. They start to notice the tiny beautiful miracles that happen on a daily basis, like a hawk swooping down to catch a fish, and things that you kind of have to be there at the right moment to witness. And they start to communicate with each other and tell each other about these tiny perfect things that they found, and they make a map of all of the little miracles that they find that happened in that 24-hour period that keeps repeating. I will probably never read this again. I don't think I'll ever be diving back in here to relive any of these. I read this during the Ghibliathon, and I don't think I'll ever read an anthology during a readathon again because I found it quite stressful. I'm not generally a person who enjoys short stories to start off with because I like really well developed books. Like, my favorite types of stories are series with like 10 installments and have like a really complex plot and where you fall in love with the characters because you've been with them for so long, and you just don't get that with a short story. So I am glad that I read this. A lot of the stories had very atmospheric summer vibes, but I'll probably never read it again, and I will likely be on hold in this. The second book that I read was the last book that I read for Ghibliathon, and that is The Umbrella Academy Apocalypse Suite by Gerard Way and Gabriel Barr. This is the first installment in the Umbrella Academy series of graphic novels. I really love the Netflix show, which is what drew me to this. It's the reason that I wanted to read it. But this is a science fiction graphic novel series that is written by the lead singer of My Chemical Romance, Gerard Way, and it follows a group of children who have been adopted by this, I don't want to say mad scientist, he's an inventor and a billionaire, but the circumstances of each of these children's births was very unique in that none of their mothers were pregnant at the start of the day that they were born. They just all miraculously gave birth on the same day at the same time, and Reginald Hargreaves, the billionaire, went out of his way to adopt as many of these children that he could find. He did manage to find 7, and as these children were maturing, they started to develop unique powers, which Reginald Hargreaves trained them in. He monitored them as well as helped them to advance these powers. However, it has been many years since then, and these children are now in their 30s. They all hate their father. Most of them don't really like each other all that much. They resent this upbringing they had where they were forced into a superhero role and they were celebrities, and their adopted father sent them out to save the world on multiple occasions, but they've all gone their separate ways now until they are all called back to the Umbrella Academy because their adoptive father, Reginald Hargreaves, has died. Now, I think the show does a much better job with this story than the graphic novel does. It could be because I watched the show first, but I did give this 3 stars. I didn't really love it, and the reason that I didn't love it is because the things that I like about the show and the reason that I wanted to read this is because in the show we have very complex characters with very complex issues that have arisen from their upbringing, the way that they treated each other and the way that their father treated them, as well as the different ways in which they all responded to being superheroes and also being famous. So if, for example, one of them is now a vigilante, so he still does the superhero thing, he just does it in a different way. One of them used her power to become really famous, but she no longer uses her power anymore. So I really like the complexity and the grey morality in the show. I also really like the way that the plot was developed in the show, and I think that the creators of the show did a really good job of making these characters seem human. Imperfect and flawed, but definitely human. However, the graphic novel series is very much action-based. It is more like a traditional superhero story. You have issues that just chronicle them saving the world. There's one particular moment where they are saving Paris from the Eiffel Tower. That's sort of a flashback of when they're children. And it is definitely a lot more action-based and focusing on the plot and what they're doing than the show is. I felt like the plot didn't make as much sense in this as it did in the show when everything was fleshed out. It was okay. I will continue with this series. It won't be a huge priority. I do own volume 2. They are releasing a 3rd volume in August, I think. I'm not going to hurry out and buy it, but I will continue with this series in my own time. I then finished an audiobook, which I'm not going to talk about too much, but that was Then He Ate My Boy in Trances by Louise Renison. This is I think it's the 6th book in the Confessions of Georgie Nicholson series, which is one of my favourite series from childhood. There are 10 books in this series in total. However, I think when book 10 was released, I was in 6th form college, so I was 17 or 18, and at that time in my life I was definitely putting more focus on socializing than reading, so I just didn't buy the last book when it was released. I always kind of intended to read it, but then it got to a point, and the point was last year, where I realized I would have to reread the entire thing because I have to read that last book because I need closure on this series. The 9th book leaves off on a massive cliffhanger. So essentially I have been listening to the audiobooks of this series when I'm in the car. I am only in the car by myself schedule for 40 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes each week, and that is the only time I listen to audiobooks, so I don't get a whole lot of audiobook time in, and it just so happened that I finished this particular installment in June. I did give this one 4 stars, and the only other book in this series I have rated less than 5 stars is the first book. If you don't know what this series is about, it is the diary of a teenage girl in the UK. I think she's 13, about to turn 14 when the series starts, and she is 15 going on 16 where I'm up to at the minute. But it is essentially just a coming of age story told in diary format. It's about boys, it's about your first kiss, it's about what to do when your very best friend gets in a serious relationship for the first time, and all of those things that kind of happen to you when you're a teenager. What I will say about this is that I would not recommend it to people who are reading this series for the first time, because in terms of standing up to the test of time, it doesn't do great. Like, some of the content in these books would not fly in 2019. However, if you did enjoy this series when you were younger, I would definitely recommend rereading it if you want to. At 26, I still find it absolutely hilarious, and Louise Renison, who is the author of the books, does narrate the audiobook. She sadly passed away in 2016, but I definitely think it adds a lot of dimension to have the author read the book, because there are a lot of made-up words. Like, Georgia and her friends have a made-up language and they just kind of make up words on the fly, and I don't think anybody else could have narrated these books apart from Louise Renison, so it's definitely a really special experience for me listening to them via audiobook. I then read another 3-star read, and that was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan, and I am sad, I am so sad that this was 3 stars. You guys have probably been waiting on reviews for this book because it is a 2019 release. I have filmed a book diary. When it will go up, who knows, because apparently I don't edit book diaries anymore, I just film them. I have so many that I need to post. So Wicked Saints is a young adult fantasy that takes place in a Russian/Eastern European inspired setting. This book does kind of take place across 2 countries. You have a country where people are very religious and they worship the gods, and you also have a country where people have cast off the gods. They are known as the heretic, and the majority of them are also blood mages. Now, in this book we follow 2 perspectives. We have Nadja, who is from the country that is very religious, and we have Seraphine, who is a blood mage. Now, Nadja is not only religious, she is also special because she is a cleric, and she believes that she is the last cleric in existence. A cleric is somebody who has been chosen by a specific god, and they can then harness the powers of that god, and that is how they perform magic. However, Nadja is even more special because she can harness the powers of all of the gods. Now, on the other hand, we have Seraphine, who is known as the High Prince. He is the prince of his country. He is royalty, but he is also a very skilled warlord. He has spent most of his late teenage and early adulthood at the front lines of the war, and this story starts off where Seraphine has arrived at the monastery where Nadja lives, and he sacks it. He kills a bunch of people, he takes some of them hostage, and Nadja manages to escape. So that is like the very first chapter of this book and where the story gets going. Now, we do also have one other main character. I believe he is called Malachias. I call him Mal because I can't pronounce his full name. There are definitely lots of complex names in here. I could do with listening to just a little bit of the audiobook so that I know how to pronounce everybody's name, but I think it's Malachias. Nadja meets Malachias soon after she's escaped, and Malachias is a blood mage. However, he has defected from the army and he is now on the run, and Malachias and his 2 companions are looking for a way to end this war that has been ravaging both Nadja's and Malachias's countries for over 100 years. They team up, but Nadja doesn't trust him very much. She refers to him as a monster. That one was for you, Cody. He definitely has a dark side. He has some issues that we don't know about, but him and Nadja seem just a little bit drawn to each other. So that is pretty much the bare bones of the plot of this. It definitely went in a lot of directions that I wasn't expecting, but that's pretty much where we start off. Now, I enjoyed this book. If I gave it a rating purely on enjoyment, then I would probably give it 4 stars. However, there were a lot of things that just really brought it down to 2 stars for me. So the first thing that I knew going into this book is that Emily A. Duncan is a bit of a Grisha fangirl, and a lot of people refer to this as a Alina Darkling type romance, which I do kind of get. And I went into this expecting it to be very much like the Grisha series. However, aside from the setting, and I feel like we have both a Darkling type character and a more morally grey Nikolai character in here, I don't think that this was too similar to the Grisha. The problem I had with it is that it was very similar to a lot of other very popular young adult series. So around halfway through this book, Nadia arrives at a new setting, and as soon as she gets there, it was very reminiscent of the Queen's Trial in the Red Queen series, and also the Assassin Championship in Throne of Glass, and the relationship between Nadia and a certain other character reminded me a lot of the relationship between Dorian and Selena in the first Throne of Glass book. So that kind of annoyed me a little bit, because while I love all of those series, and Emily A. Duncan probably does as well, it was just a little bit too much, especially as I went into this expecting it to remind me of the Grisha, and it actually reminded me of a whole ton of my other favourite series. The other reason that this kind of got 3 stars and I couldn't give it 4 is that this was a lot like season 8 of Game of Thrones, and what I mean by that is that a lot of things happened at the end. There was a lot of plot twists and they had my head spinning, but not in the way that makes you want to die because you didn't see it coming, in the way that you're like, what the fuck, why is this happening? So we have all of these plot twists like in season 8 of Game of Thrones, but you don't know why they're happening. For example, we'll have a chapter where 2 main characters are making a plan to do something. The chapter ends as they've made that plan, and then we go to the beginning of the next chapter and one of them is betraying the other one, but you didn't see any of the in-between. You didn't see where one character went to an opposing party and tension was built because you didn't really know whether they were going to betray them. It literally went from I am on your side, let's do this, to betrayal. And I feel like that was my main problem with this. A lot of the things that happened I really loved. The last 2 pages of this book I absolutely adored. I just didn't understand anybody's motives for doing absolutely anything, and I was so confused about that. The last issue that I had with this is that I really struggled with concentration when I was reading it. I thought it could have just been me, but I was reading 2 other books at the same time and I was focusing on them fine. I think it might have been because of the pacing in some of this. It was very fast paced in parts, and like I said, things were happening that didn't really make any sense, so I just felt my mind wandering and I just could not retain any information. But I think that was definitely a book thing, even though I can't pinpoint what it was, because like I said, I was reading other things at the time and my concentration was fine there. However, there were some things that I like about this. I really liked the romance in this. I really liked the plot. Like I said, it was like season 8 of Game of Thrones. I enjoyed everything that happened. It was just the bits that fill in the gaps that just weren't there. So that being said, I think a few of the problems that I had with this could be because Emily A. Duncan is a debut author and I will most certainly be picking up the sequel to this. And I think because of the problem that I had retaining the information, and because of what I said about me lacking concentration while reading this, as well as there not really being a whole ton of motive and character and plot development in between the plot events, I am going to reread this before I read the sequel as well. I would also like to point out that I buddy read this with Cody from Cody's Book Corner and Hayley from Hayley Murray, and I'm not sure if Hayley's finished it yet actually, but Cody pretty much said the same thing as me, and the last time Hayley checked in, a lot of things were making her cringe, so I think we had pretty average opinions across the board. The next book that I finished was Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second book in the Grisha trilogy. I was buddy reading this with Jade from JD Ray Reads. We are buddy reading the entire Grishaverse, reading 1 book every month, and this was the book for June. So if you are unfamiliar with the Grisha trilogy, it follows a girl called Alina who lives in a war-torn country that has an area of darkness full of monsters called the Fold that kind of bisects the country, and for them to get any supplies from the coast they have to cross this area. Alina is drafted into the army. She is a map maker, and one day when she's crossing that shadowy area, she realizes she has powers that nobody else has, even though there are people who are the Grisha in this world who are magic wielders. None of those have quite the same powers that Alina does, and she is whisked away to the Grisha Academy to train her magical powers because she could be the key to destroying the Fold forever. I'm gonna say something pretty controversial about this book, and it is that I like it more than Shadow and Bone. Everybody hates this book. I know there was a Grisha read along not long ago and everybody was complaining about this book. Everybody hates it. Earlier today I watched Mel from Mel Moriarty's June wrap up and she hated it as well. Everybody hates this book, but I think it's my favourite in the series. So as you guys may know, I am rereading this series. I read the entire trilogy in 2015, but I never continued on to Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, and I would like to do that, but because I would also like to read King of Scars, I do want to reread this entire trilogy first, just so that I have the backstory of this particular series when I go into King of Scars, stars, which is about my favourite character Nikolai, who coincidentally is introduced in this book and may have something to do with why I like it so much. So one of the reasons that people don't like this book is because nothing really happens, and I do definitely agree with you, but I also have a theory as to why I actually really enjoy this book. So when I read Shadow and Bone both in 2015 and last month, I kind of thought it was average. You know, we have this story with a chosen one character. Yes, you have a very morally grey character that you didn't normally have in young adult stories at the time that these books were published, which I think the first one was published in 2012. But aside from that, it's pretty much very standard. Somebody doesn't know that they're special, they find out they're special, they think that life is going to get better because of this, but they actually find out that people just want to exploit them. Plot twist, big fight, the end. That's Shadow and Bone, and that is also the plot of many different fantasy stories. So when I read that book, I was like, okay, this is just kind of average, and I wish it had been fleshed out a little bit more. You know, I wanted some more information about the plot, the history of the country. I wanted to know a little bit more about the characters. I wanted to see them develop, and I don't think that happens all that much in the first book. I mean, one of our main characters, Mal, just pops in and out conveniently whenever the main character needs him. However, this book is entirely plot development, character development, and world building. That is all this book is. So I like it for that reason, because as I explained earlier with why I don't like short stories, I want to know every little bit of world building. If you want to put 5 chapters of info dumping on world building at the beginning of a fantasy book, that is cool with me, because I like to know all of these things going into a story. And that was my complaint with Shadow and Bone. I don't want to say that it was underdeveloped, because I definitely think there was enough development for it to serve its purpose and for it to be a nice contained story. It just wasn't as developed as I personally like in my stories, and this book adds all of that development and complexity, which is why I really like it. Aside from that, like I said, we have Nikolai, who is a cheeky charmer with a whole lot of swagger, which is my favourite love interest type of character to ever exist. And my favourite quote from this entire series, I won't read it to you because it may be a bit spoilery, but it is contained in this book, and I forgot all about it until I read it, and then I realised, I remembered how much I love that quote. So that was a great moment as well. So I give this 4 stars, same as the first book. I am kind of rating them generously based on nostalgia. I won't be doing that with Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom because I'll be reading them for the first time, but these are definitely tinged with a little bit of nostalgia for me. So unless I find anything that greatly offends me upon reread, I will pretty much just be giving them the same rating as I did when I read them in 2015. I then read the last book in the Wayfarer series, which is Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. Now, the Wayfarer series is an adult sci-fi trilogy that follows different groups of people that are traveling through space for different reasons. Until I read Orange Volume 1 in the first half of June, the first book in this series, which is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, was my favourite book of the year so far. So like I said, this series is very character driven. The first 2 books have a very minor plot going through them that kind of ties it together and makes it a full functioning novel, but this one was definitely based more on themes than anything else, and all 3 of them are, but this one kind of lacked the overarching plot. So this book in particular follows the inhabitants of the Exodus fleet, and the Exodus fleet is the fleet of spaceships that humans fled Earth on when the Earth started to die. They spent generations melting down their cities and building these ships because the Earth was going to die and humanity wanted to carry on. The problem is that this fleet was only really built to last long enough for humans to get into space and find a habitable planet. They hadn't managed to do that so far, but they were thinking if humans can live in space for long enough, they will find somewhere to live. Now, the humans obviously did get to space, and they were accepted into the Galactic Commons, which is a governing body that governs a whole bunch of different planets and different alien species. And when the humans were accepted, they could go live anywhere they wanted within the Galactic Commons, and some of them did. Some of them chose to adventure, some of them built colonies, but some of them also decided to stay behind. Now, the reason that I gave this 4 stars instead of 5 stars is because we follow a whole bunch of characters in here, and they are not related. They are kind of very slightly interwoven, but for the most part they are separate. They have their own problems, we're following them for a different reason, and they have their own like mini plot thread. And I think that that definitely hampered my enjoyment, because with this being such a character driven series, the thing that I like so much about the first 2 books is that you develop a deep connection with these characters. Becky Chambers just has a way of making you really love her characters and fall in love with them, and because there were so many in here and we were skipping between them, unlike the previous books, not every character is in almost every chapter, I just didn't feel as connected to them. And as that was the thing that I enjoyed most about the series, I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. One of the great things about Becky Chambers books is that a whole range of people can go into them and all withdraw different conclusions. What I personally got from this is that there are major themes of small town mentality in here, and also the struggle between advancing in technology and moving forward and keeping up with the times, and how to balance that with tradition and keeping your cultural identity and staying true to yourself and your community. So like I said, we have a whole range of characters in here, and some of them want to be on the Exodus fleet, some of them don't. We even follow a character who is new onto the Exodus fleet, and the reason that he is there is because he has lived on a planet and he knows that it's rough. You have to fight for your survival, you have to have a job, you have to pay your bills, you have to buy your food. But if you're on the Exodus fleet, where their currency is trade and the only real value they have career-wise is how much they contribute to the society, this character knows that he will always be fed, he will always have somewhere to live, and there will be people there to look after him, society will look after him, and he won't have to fight so hard for his own survival. Juxtaposing that, we do have a teenage boy who is doing everything that he can to get out of the fleet because he just finds it so boring and mind-numbing. It's the same things every day, and he wants a little bit more adventure and excitement in his life, and because of this he does rebel against his parents quite a lot. We also have an older lady who is responsible for the archives on the Exodus fleet. I'm not sure exactly what her job within the archives is, but the archives is where all of the knowledge of humanity from the dawn of time, everything that humans ever knew up until everything that's happened on the Exodus fleet, is all stored there so that humans never forget where they came from and they won't repeat their mistakes because they know what they did to the original planet they inhabited. We also have an alien character who is coming onto the Exodus fleet to document what their way of life is like and write about it in a journal that will be accessible by a whole range of alien species. And then the other main perspective that we have is Tessa, who is the sister of the captain in the first book. She's happy there. She never really thought about leaving. Her brother left to find his success in open space, and she stayed behind and lives with her father as well as her 2 children. However, right at the beginning of this book, we see a disaster that happened a few years ago where one of these ships in the fleet developed a hole and the whole thing exploded and the entire population of that ship died. Tessa's daughter witnessed this and is now terrified of windows, open space. She doesn't want to be too close to the walls, and Tessa has to decide whether change is worth it. The Exodus fleet was always safe and that is why people stayed there, but if something like that can happen in the fleet, maybe living on a planet wouldn't be so bad after all. Another thing about Becky Chambers books is that they are very diverse. We have real life diversity, so there is a whole spectrum of genders in here as well as a whole spectrum of sexualities. This series is also very sex positive. There are sex workers in here, but it's not a frowned upon job. It is more of a public service, and we have representation of different races, not only in the colour of people's skin but also represented by the alien races, because as this is futuristic, nobody really cares about the colour of anybody's skin anymore. They are more likely to feel prejudice towards different alien species. Having a different coloured skin is not very different from yourself when you have a alien that looks like a lizard like 2 feet away from you. So I really like the diversity in this series and the way that contemporary issues and societal issues are tackled in this futuristic science fiction setting. And then lastly, the final book that I read in June is a new favourite, and it took me completely by surprise, and that is The Furies by Katie Lowe. Now this is an art copy. If you remember, I picked it up right at the end of May or the beginning of June from a charity shop, and most recent purchase came up in my June Bookopoly. And essentially the reason that I picked this up at a charity shop is solely because it was an ARC. I thought it looked cool. I like it when they print the big text on just a picture, and every time I see an ARC in a charity shop I'm always really intrigued about who's receiving them. And as this book was released on the 2nd of May 2019, I decided to pick it up and give it a try, and I am so glad that I did. So there are less than 200 ratings of this book on Goodreads, and Goodreads has it categorized as young adult, but the first thing I'm going to say about this is that it is very much adult. I do believe that this book is only being released in October in the US, and I'm not sure how it will be rated for a US market, but in the UK it is sold as adult, and to me it reads like adult. So when I was looking up this book, the main plot that was advertised to me is that a 16-year-old girl is found on school property and nobody knows how she died. She is in perfect condition. It looks like her heart literally just stopped, but she had no underlying medical conditions and there are no signs of foul play. So that is how this book was advertised to me. I thought it was a young adult thriller. It turns out it's an adult thriller, but I was very much intrigued by that because on the front we have "You'd Kill to Be One of Them." So I was thinking like bitchy school cliques as this girl was found murdered on school property. And you know, those vibes are kind of true, but this book is just so different different than what I expected from it, and it is so much more than I expected. So we start this book off with the prologue, and it is describing how the girl was found dead, and it alludes to the main character knowing a little bit about how she died. Now this book is set in 1998, and I thought that the narrative of this would be that we have found a girl dead and we're trying to find out who did it, but that is not how this book is told. This is told from our main character around 20 years in the future, so probably 2018, recounting the year up to the death of this girl. So you have a mystery element here because we know that the girl is dead, but we don't know who she is and we don't know how she died. As the main character has alluded to knowing something about it, we assume that she was murdered, but we don't know for sure. And we are following our main character, who is now an adult, recounting this one year that she was 16 and she was hanging around with this group of girls. So our main character was in a car accident when she was around 15, and her father and her younger sister died. Since that happened, her mother has ceased to live her life. She is in a deep depression, she is overcome with grief, and she will not move forward with her life, which gives our main character pretty much free reign. Our main character, who is called Violet, I'll refer to her as Violet now instead of keep saying our main character. So Violet has just finished high school and she intends to get a job, but her family got a very large payout from this car accident, and her mother suggests that she goes to this private all-girls sixth form college to get her A-levels, and Violet doesn't really want to, but she says that she'll go along and try to get in just for the sake of her mother. But when she arrives on the school grounds, she is overcome with how beautiful they are. It's very gothic, there's a big beautiful clock tower, and then Violet also finds out that it was the site of some witch trials in the 1600s. When she starts at the school, she comes across this enigmatic group of 3 girls who are outcasts, but everybody also kind of admires them, but they're very aloof and exclusive. And when she is accepted into their group, she will do absolutely anything for them. So when her art teacher asks her to join a secret society that the girls are also a part of, she jumps at the chance. So the way that I would describe this book is the craft but British. There are witchy vibes in here that I didn't really expect. I mean, Louise O'Neill said witches, murder and teenage girls on the back, and that is literally the only inkling that I had that this was going to have any witchy aspects at all. This book has some very feminist themes. The secret society that Violet joins is mainly centered around how women were treated in history, including the original founder of the school, as she was the witch who was burned at the stake for murder on the grounds of the school. So it kind of starts off talking about how she was persecuted for being a strong, independent, educated woman, and then there is also a lot of discussion about how women in Greek myth and the classics were treated. There are lots of dark topics in here, including sexual abuse, domestic abuse, animal sacrifice, grief and depression. So if you are sensitive to any of those topics, then I would advise looking more into this before you decide to pick it up. But I definitely think that it is a worthwhile read. I'm surprised how much I love this considering it is set in the UK. Normally I find with books set in the UK that they are either very gritty and focus on chav culture, or they're very like quaint countryside, like cute little innocent girl next door lives on a farm, etc, etc. I found this to be very relatable. I mean, in 1998 I was 5, so I have very vague memories of the 90s, but from what I remember and what I know of growing up in England in the 90s and the early 2000s, this is like a pretty accurate representation. I mean, it's far-fetched in some aspects, but a lot of it was really accurate and I appreciated that. Another thing that tipped me off that this wasn't young adult is that all of the girls smoke, even though they were only 16, which again is accurate for Britain in the 90s, and there is also alcohol abuse and substance abuse in here. Something that I really liked about this is that even though there were strong feminist themes in here and we have a lot of questionable male characters in here, the female characters are not flawless, they're not perfect. There are lots of themes of revenge, and sometimes they take it too far, sometimes they are just overcome with anger and they go just that little bit too far and you're like, whoa girl, that was seriously fucked up. But overall I would definitely highly recommend this. I loved this so much more than I expected to. Before I picked this up I thought I was just gonna read it and unhaul it and be like, meh, it was 3 stars. But this is one of my new favourite books, and Katie Lowe is now an auto by author from me. It is already out in the UK. There is an exclusive red sprayed edge edition at Waterstones, and for the US I think it is released in October, although you can probably get it on Book Depository. So finally, those are all of the books that I read in June. I have been talking for a hell of a long time and I hope I can edit this down to be a lot smaller than the raw footage that I have right now. But please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Please also Also, don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.